and get started. I'd love to welcome everyone to the Statewide Lab Partnership call. As I've said before, if you could sign into the chat box, signing in both your name and your facility, that would be of great help for us. So today, we've got our a good group on that will be able to assist with any questions that our laboratorians may have. I would like to remind everybody that this meeting is recorded, and it really does serve as my minutes, as I do post these on our NPHL website. I'd like to maybe introduce anybody who is new to either NPHL or DHHS. Robin, do you have anybody new there at all that you would like to share?
I do not believe we have anybody new joining us today that I can think of. Unless I'm missing somebody, please speak up.
Yeah, that's all right. And I don't know if either Pete or Emily are on.
This is Phelps Memorial Health Center, and I'm Brandy. I'm listening today for Tiffany.
Oh, good. Thank you, Brandy. That's good to know. Can you get to the chat box and go ahead and type your name in too? So.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Brandy. Not hearing either of my partners at NPHL, I think I'll just go ahead and get started. We do have a fellow that has joined NPHL who will be shadowing for 2 weeks here. His name is Mark, and I can't remember his last name, so I will have.
His name's Matt Martin, and he's here with me.
There he is. I was hoping you guys would bail me out. The memory's not so well. So thank you, Emily. If you would do introduction.
Sure. Sorry, we just hopped on. So I'm assuming we're introducing Matt.
Yes.
Okay. So this is Matt Martin, Dr. Matt Martin. He is a CDC LLS fellow. Would you like to share anything?
Sure, yeah. So I'm here for 2 weeks. I spent last week here, and I'll be here for this week as well. I'm normally at the Wisconsin laboratory, so it's good to be here.
Yeah, it's always good to share our experiences. So we're really happy to have Matt here with us today. So,
and he's a Creighton alum, like a lot of people on this call.
Oh, yay! Go Jays! All right. With that, I think we'll get started in our lineup on outbreak updates. Of course, we always have the reminder from our EPI folks that if you have anything unusual that is out of the ordinary or new, please make sure and contact your local health department. Please contact your state lab as well in regards to what you've got and what the request has been from your physician, so that we can assist you with any paperwork that might be necessary, and we'll get that rolling. Some of those do need approval, and that's why we want to help you with the process. So I will start out today with monkeypox. Who would like to take monkeypox on here? Anybody have numbers for us?
I was trying to look for somebody that might be on. I don't have those numbers. It must be a busy week.
It
Off
has been, and
my
I
head.
apologize. I sometimes have them and don't have them this morning either. So I must confess, I am home with COVID, just recovering, but I'm okay, other than sometimes losing my voice. So
Say, Karen, this is Pete.
might be,
I can give you some numbers that I know of as of last week.
thank you. That'd be
Um,
great.
Nebraska has reported, the last I heard, has reported 28 cases of monkeypox. And 26 of those were identified in the public health lab, and 2 of those were identified in, I believe it was a reference lab. Our volume of testing seems to be, I don't know, about the same, I guess, and maybe it's a little bit less than what we've seen in the past, but our positivity rate has gone down. So I guess that's good news. The public health lab is also helping Oklahoma Public Health Lab do testing. And Oklahoma, we've seen 22 positives from Oklahoma in our lab as well. So we've seen a fair number of positive monkeypox cases. So at this moment, I don't believe there's any clinical labs that are doing any testing for monkeypox in the state.
All
It's all
right.
reference labs or the public health lab.
Makes sense.
That's what I know, Karen, anyway.
Thank you. Thank you for those numbers. And I do know that it still applies, that specimen supplies, things that you might need to collect monkeypox, unfortunately falls to the clinics and to the laboratories to provide those supplies. However, if you do need help, we can assist anybody on a one case-by-case basis. So keep that in mind if you do have a case. We do not recommend that you stockpile specimens at your clinics. Maybe have a couple of sets or kits ready that if they need to be sent out at the last minute, that they could be done. So, all right. Thank you, Pete. We really appreciate that. Do we have anything new on the SARS-CoV front? I mean, I know I hear that there are a lot of people positive, but I don't know if that is really shown in our laboratory numbers. I do know that a lot of people are starting to use their home tests, some of them who are expired. Even some of the clinics have discovered that their kits are expired. What can we share with that?
Well, I know that, you know, it's just steady COVID testing. With the expired kits, I guess you guys have to talk more about that, but no new variants as of right now, really. And, you know, as respiratory season ramps up, I do expect us to see more. Just encouraging people to get their vaccine. Prevention. It's the only thing that pretty much stops respiratory illness.
And a good reminder, Robin, I know that the newest vaccine out there simply does have the Omicron included with it. So definitely recommend everybody get that vaccine, especially if you are immunosuppressed like me. So I think that would be extremely helpful. All right, so I think we know, I mean, we've been through SARS-CoV before, and I don't think there's a whole lot new other than, yes, you're right, Robin, we should talk about expired kits that might be in the clinics. Those that were handed out initially at the beginning of the pandemic have lived through their lifespan, and the state is not handing out any more kits, as far as I know. 20 Tony, excuse me, Epstein, Tony, can help us with that. I think, I know you were on earlier, if you could speak to that.
This is Tony Goldenstein. Did you
Yes,
have a
that's,
question for
I am
me?
so sorry. Kept thinking
Okay.
Gravenstein and I knew that wasn't right.
Okay. And what was the question?
The question is we have clinics saying that their kits are expired. So can you share with us what they need to do?
I think they're just going to have to reorder. I do remember reading a while ago that there may have been expiration date extensions because when they were putting things out so quickly before, they could only say that they were good for so long and that they may have been able to extend them. But I would check with the vendor to see if that's really the case.
Yes.
Question for you. On an ER patient that you saw, are you on speaker? Are you on? Okay.
Go ahead.
So on Derek Wilkinson for his ER visit.
Kelly, you're not muted.
Thank you.
So I do see a question from Ashley. Are laboratories supposed to continue reporting COVID testing to the state?
Yes, it is still reportable until the further notice. There was the change in if you don't have to report all negative antigens if you're a certain category. But everything's the same and has not changed. And so keep doing what you're doing as it relates to COVID.
All right. Thank you, Robin. Excuse me, while you're on, Robin, would you like to speak to flu and RSV?
Sure.
And about our surveillance program this year?
Yes. So flu season is right around the corner. We, as always, we don't know what it's supposed to look like, but the start is October 2nd. So for those that report manually into our weekly survey, we would like you to start reporting your survey data for the first week by the 11th, Monday, October 11th by noon, for those who are not submitting their flu and RSV data through electronic lab reporting. You will be getting emails from Mike Ray this year on the reminder emails from him. And then we are sending out our annual lab survey to do a double check on what testing you're performing, which influenza test, RSV tests, and we're going to include COVID testing just so we can get an updated listing of what all is being performed at the laboratories. And there might be a couple extra disease questions depending on what our surveillance programs may need to know from the laboratories. That usually changes year to year. So be expecting that in the next couple weeks. We are also having a influenza surveillance 101 presentation on the 28th of October at 10 a.m. And I know there is a lab meeting during that time, but we will get out the presentation and any to you all so that you have that information. And if you have any questions, you always can contact me about surveillance in general. We will be accepting specimens that are positive for flu A and B. We have some Sentinel labs that we will be sending out specimen collection kits, and Sentinel providers that we send out specimen collection kits. But if you're seeing any A or B in your facilities, We would like to get those in, especially at the beginning of the season, just to determine what is circulating. Last year we hardly saw any bees. So if you have any positive bees and possibly could get either a second specimen collection and get it into the public health lab, or send the specimen depending on which platform you use to do your testing. If you could get that into the public health lab, it'd be great. The flu B did change in the vaccine this year. So we really want to see all the specimens is submitted are submitted to CDC to check on the vaccine strain and to do antiviral resistance testing. So it is important to submit specimens to the public health lab for surveillance purposes. Again, it's not a clinical, it's not for clinical care. It's only for surveillance purposes, but it's very important. We are expecting laboratories to utilize NewAlert. So you can contact RPS if you have questions about NewAlert, get an account in all things like that. We'll have information with their contact information, and most of you have that information already, but I believe that's it for lab testing. There are videos and specimen collection materials on the MPHL website. They'll also be on the DHHS website on how to collect, ship, store your specimens for flu surveillance. So those will all be available. And if you get collection kits, they'll also be included in those. Any questions about flu surveillance right now?
Okay, thank you, Robin. Any questions about packaging and shipping of the specimen? I could even help with that. All right, hearing none, let's go ahead and move on to GI outbreaks. I did not see if Sadie or Brianna was on.
Hi, it's Brianna. Sadie no longer works at DHHS, just FYI. She's at Lancaster now.
Yep, I knew that.
Let's see. So no current outbreaks as of right now locally. There was a suspect norovirus outbreak in Douglas. Let's see. Yeah, at a daycare. We did investigate a salmonella cluster in Douglas County a couple of weeks ago. And we believe it was associated to a local barbecue restaurant. We had 14 lab confirmed cases in the cluster. 50% of them did report that local barbecue, but the other 50% did not report it. They had other exposures, other restaurants and grocery stores. So we were a little stumped on how those were linked in the cluster. We haven't identified any new cases, so we did unfortunately close it as an unknown foodborne. That's it locally. For national outbreaks, we have this outbreak every single year, but it's the Salmonella live poultry or the backyard poultry outbreak. It seems to, it's just always ongoing. It's throughout the spring and the summer, and it's even still ongoing, but there's 884 cases across the US. Nebraska, we have 23 cases right now. So, and I guess this kind of leads into my next thing, just as a reminder to make sure we are sending salmonella and sugar toxin producing E. coli's, any CIDT detections or cultures. We want them all sent to the public health lab so we can get those whole genome sequencing results and see if any of our cases are linked to multi-state outbreaks, or of course we use them for local analysis too if we're seeing a cluster of cases linked together. So just an FYI on that.
All right.
Say,
Brianna,
Brianna, this is,
go ahead, Pete.
yeah, any Campylobacter outbreaks that you're dealing with at all?
No.
Not that you're aware of.
Is there anything you know about that we don't?
Well, we had two last week that were Campylobacter coli from a couple elderly patients, same time frame, and both of them had a somewhat unusual sensitivity results. So it looks
They
like
were
it
from the
might
same-
be related.
Okay. If you want to send me those patients in an email, a secure email, I can look into them, but
Okay, I'll
we're,
do that.
we're still not requesting or requiring local health departments to follow up on Campy right now. Since, COVID, and it's still very burdensome.
Yeah. I'll send you the two names just to see.
Yeah, I can look into
It
it.
looks suspicious from us from the lab standpoint.
Okay, that sounds good.
All right. All right.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Brianna. And that is an amazing number of backyard chicken outbreaks. Wow. So you're right. Just as a reminder to laboratories, if your BioFire or other multi-platform test turns positive, do not put the specimen away. Please, please, please send it to us. If you have the capability to actually culture it out, that is by far the best, because once you send it in transport, the recovery rate is really, really low. So that's what we do ask, that you all try at least to either culture it or send it to MPHL. Moving on, I think I saw Jeff, you're on.
Hey, real quick, as you say that, and just BioFires reminded me, if during flu season, if anybody has any unsubtypables on any of their respiratory panels, please send those to the public health lab for confirmation.
Yes, definitely. All right. I thought we'd move on unless anybody has questions about GI outbreaks. Okay. Going on to arbovirus. Did I see Jeff Hammock on?
Hi, Karen. This is Jeff. I'm here.
Hi, good. Thank you.
Yes. I think the big thing here is West Nile virus. It is prime West Nile virus season, and we've actually seen an increase over the last several weeks, a pretty significant increase in our environmental surveillance in the number of positive mosquito samples. In a 2-week time, we saw 50 positive mosquito samples come in. And just for our frame of reference, all of last year, we saw 37. So, and last year was kind of above average year. So we saw a pretty significant increase over the last several weeks. And, typically we will see human cases follow several weeks later after that. So kind of something to keep in the back of folks' minds. Where we had an above average year last year, we may get lucky where there's some immunity built into the human population. So maybe that will kind of stymie the number of cases we potentially may see. But just to want to keep that on everybody's radar, since we did see a pretty significant increase. Looking at the last 5 years, it's the second most positives we've had at this time of year. The only other year that was worse was 2018, and if folks remember 2018, that's when we led the country in cases. So again, just kind of keep that in the back of folks' minds here over the next several weeks. That'll kind of, I think, really kind of determine what kind of season we're going to have. So that's West Nile virus right now. What we're seeing, we'll kind of see how. Last week's samples we sent up to MPHL, we'll see how many positives we get out of that and see if we start to see a downtrend or if we're kind of still going up. It is a little bit late in the year. Typically, we kind of see a downtrend, when at this time in terms of the positivity in our mosquito samples. But, we were kind of still going up. So hopefully we'll see a little bit of change this week. Besides West Nile virus, another thing I kind of wanted to bring up, Karen, folks, is dengue. There is a lot of dengue circulating out and about across the world. So just kind of a reminder, if people are traveling to areas or coming back from areas that they've traveled to that are dengue endemic, always keep that in the back of the mind. dengue symptoms a lot of times can mimic West Nile virus and vice versa. So just kind of keep that in mind. Travel history is an important thing, as we're seeing a lot of dengue in a lot of areas across the world, particularly in the Caribbean area, the Central and South America regions. There's been a pretty big uptick in dengue cases as well. So, and if people are suspecting that, another thing to remember too is sometimes the commercial laboratory tests for, especially serologies for West Nile and or dengue, they can cross-react. So if there's a scenario where they could have been exposed to mosquitoes both traveling and or here in Nebraska, and we need to kind of maybe differentiate whether it's a dengue versus West Nile infection to kind of get that lab evidence. We can work to get that sent for confirmatory testing. Just a heads up if that's a scenario that people run into.
All right.
And I think that's it. For the kind of the main things for arbovirus.
All right. Thank you. So that's why it's so important to ask travel. I know as laboratorians, we don't get to always see that information, but if you're ever involved with your hospital meetings, certainly it's something that, or the clinic meetings, that they should always ask. I've always been a big believer of asking those questions right up front. So good to know. Okay. All right. With that, I think we'll move on unless there's any other questions about arbovirus. I don't see anything in chat. We would like to move on to the antibiotic resistant laboratory network. And I believe I saw Ishrat on. Do you have anything to share there? I did see her.
Sorry, Karen. Yeah, I was I don't believe I'm working with Minnesota ARLN. It's just that we had a case, and we are screening the close contact of that case. And this case was for a CPE, carbapenem-resistant Enterobacterales. It was found in the urine sample of an outpatient, and it was an NDM5. That's what Minnesota ARLN has identified. And that's about it. And I think for the screening of the contact, because the contact actually wanted to get screened, we requested swab from Minnesota, and Minnesota is sending the swab to the provider right now, and they are going to work on that. So that's the update we have.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. So they didn't need to do any more surveillance beyond the patient themselves.
Right. They didn't have to, because the patient only went outpatient for some kind of therapies, rehab therapies, and did not come into contact with any other personnel. However, I want to mention something that earlier you said something about traveling. That is such an important question to ask for MDROs, and that's what we are finding out more and more, that question is becoming really relevant in case of Pseudomonas and NDM5 especially, and this specific person had history of traveling outside the United States.
Yes, thank you. The travel question, of course, came up back in the Ebola days. However, I feel that a lot of hospitals and physicians have dropped that question. And I feel it should be just a normal part of the patient registration. Some hospitals and clinics are really good about it. Some just aren't. And it may come down the line long after the specimen has been sent to the laboratory. All right. Pete, I just thought I'd ask Dr. Iwan if you had any that you've run across in lab regarding resistant organisms.
Well, Karen, we always have resistance showing up, of course, in the lab. I'm trying to think of anything unusual. We do see a fair number of carbapenem-resistant Pseudomonas come through our lab, the non-CSF patients. We've never, to my knowledge, detected a carbapenem ACE producing Pseudomonas. But we do screen those. Anything else that's come across recently? Can't think of anything. We, as I mentioned before, we do see every so often a fairly resistant Campylobacter come through the lab. And I suspect some of these are related. I don't know how many labs out there even do susceptibility testings on Campylobacter. It's probably not that many, but we do routinely do it here in our laboratory.
Right. All right. Good to know. And that is something that we've always questioned regarding Campylobacter. Obviously, we don't have you send it to MPHL. It's not one of those organisms where you have to send in. However, it is worth looking into to see when you isolate it, if it should be sent to a reference laboratory for susceptibility testing. Believe it or not, it is recommended by the CDC, and we do see more and more resistance. So just a reminder to laboratories who do stools. Obviously, this is something that not many laboratories do anymore, is to do cultures on stool. What happens if you get it on the biofire? What if it's identified there? Is it something that a laboratory could try to isolate out just to do the susceptibility? I hope that is something people would consider. So
in any sense, if people do isolate it from culture and do susceptibilities, and they do see resistant organisms, we'd be interested in getting those in the public health lab. Same would be for Shigella. If you see a highly drug resistant Shigella, send it to us as well. Those are of interest to the CDC as well for further testing. So
yeah,
I really concur. This is Paul Fay. We capture a lot of those Campylobacter isolates that are resistant, and we try to perform susceptibility testing on all those that we get. And I would say probably anywhere from 5 to 7% are resistant to Cipro and azithromycin and tetracycline. So we generally have, in those cases, we test carbapenems, which are uniformly active. But that particular phenotype is really emerging, and I think we really need to keep our eye on that. It's pretty. I understand that not everybody is treated with Campylobacter gastroenteritis, but I think it's a really important phenotype to keep our eye on.
And then we get a feel of what is floating around in our environment as well, looking at that.
yes. Thank you Paul, for that input. Go ahead, Pete.
I have a question for Dr. Ivan. Sorry.
Yes.
So you mentioned that we've seen the increase in the volume of carbapenem resistant Pseudomonas that are being referred for testing. But did I hear it correctly that even though there has been the increase in carbapenem resistant Pseudomonas, we have not yet identified a carbapenemase producing organism in Pseudomonas?
That's true. I'm not aware of us detecting any.
Okay, good. No, I just wanted to make sure.
We keep screening. We have a certain volume we're supposed to screen for every month, and that's what we do. We don't want those isolates that come from CF patients. Many of those are carbapenem resistant. But yeah, we are screening, so people can send those to us, and we'd be happy to do a carbapenemase test on those.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good question, Solomon. I think there's always good questions when it comes to antibiotic resistance. And Paul, since I have you on, I know that I had asked you to speak today. Are there any other topics you would like to cover? We'll cut you in before the TB report.
Well, I think that there was some interest in discussing more of our carbapenemase producing organisms that we've isolated here at Nebraska Medicine, and we've had 4 recently, 3 KPCs and 1 OXA48. And I'm interested in that NDM that was just found. That's a pretty rare occurrence around here in Nebraska Medicine anyway. But I think my message is how important it is for us to identify the carbapenemase that's being produced, and also to be able to identify the phenotypes associated with those particular carbapenemases. For instance, if you have KPC, there are 3 antibiotics that are new antibiotics that are appropriate for treatment: meropenem, vaborbactam, and imipenem, relebactam, and ceftazidime, avibactam. All 3 of those beta-lactamase inhibitors will inhibit KPC, and you can pretty much use all those. And we haven't come across any type of KPC specific situation where those antibiotics have been resistant. But then the really important thing is, once you get outside of KPC, then you have to use kind of different approaches, and the laboratory is the group that identifies that approach. So, for instance, if it's an OXA48, then avibactam is the only inhibitor which will work against OXA48. So that's a really important thing for us to note. And also, it's important because OXA48 does not cleave expanded spectrum cephalosporins such as ceftazidime, ceftriaxone, and cefotaxime. So what you'll get is an isolate that the 2 OXA48s that we've actually isolated have been susceptible to the 3rd generation cephalosporins, but resistant to ertapenem and imipenem. Also documenting the importance of having all 3 carbapenems on your susceptibility testing panel. And so that's kind of a clue for us to look for OXA48 in those particular samples. And so, I think it's important for us to identify the susceptibility phenotypes that you might see. And then, with NDM or ME or VEM, with the metallocarbapenemases, you have to have a totally separate approach where you might want to use astrienam plus ceftazidime and avibactam, because the metallocarbapenemases don't cleave astrienam. So there's all kinds of different approaches that are needed based upon that particular molecular result. So I think the message there is that we need to make sure we identify these as quickly as possible.
And oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No,
I thought. No, you finish your thought.
That I was finished. My thought was finished.
I was just saying that it's probably that's why we always recommend that whenever there is an isolate that has been identified anywhere with one of these CPCREs, or even those samples should also be sent to the NPHL, so that we can have those and we can perform whole genome sequencing also, and try to link cases and things to that effect. So if there are any cases of CPCREs, we should probably have those samples forward to NPHL. I think this NDM, I'm hoping that NDM case have already been sent to the NPHL by now. So yeah, we will appreciate if those and many of the labs are already doing that. Just a reminder, that that's important to have that.
This makes me think that these are pretty complex antibiotic resistance issues, and I wonder if it would behoove us to have a training. I know of a webinar possibly for local health departments and what they should know when they have antibiotic resistant organisms. I think it would be wise for us to have some new antibiotic training for our laboratories. It's been a couple years since we've talked about it, so I think there's a lot of new resistant organisms out there. at least, or they haven't heard about for a while.
Mhm.
So might want to think about that, maybe at the end of the year, or possibly the new year, we could do some training on that. So I think that might help the laboratories out. You know, it's hard to keep up with the type of antibiotics that we should be testing, or at least reporting. The testing part of it for most automated systems is pretty set, but it's the reporting part that sometimes the laboratories get good questions on. I do have a question from Brandy, who asks, should they be repeating panels if they get a CRE? And then sometimes the second panel is negative, she says. What would you recommend for that?
Well, I think that I think sometimes what happens when you're using a microscan or Vitek panel, they may become over inoculated, or sometimes you get one that may have, a contaminant of yeast in there or something along those lines as a rarity. But I think overall, if you come across an isolate that has an odd susceptibility phenotype, that could include, you've got a vancomycin resistant Staph aureus, or, you rarely ever come across carbapenem resistant Enterobacterales, then I think you definitely should repeat it, just as a rule of thumb, to really think about the appropriate inoculum and then repeat it and see where it goes. And sometimes you have other antibiotics that are kind of odd along those lines when you have that first susceptibility report. So there are a lot of nuances to that, obviously, but I would suggest you do that. And if you ever have any questions or concerns, I'm sure I can sure talk to you about those kinds of specific things, or other folks in the public health lab can.
Thank you, Paul. We could certainly forward any questions of that sort to you or to Pete, and I think that would be very helpful for the laboratories. Does anybody else have questions?
I may just one clarifying question for Dr. Fay. The OXA 48 that you mentioned, that you have identified, that the one from a couple of years ago that you were talking about, or is it more recent one that you're mentioning?
Yeah, we just had one. We did have one a couple of years ago. You're right, with the same phenotype that we had just I think 2 weeks ago. We had a new one, a new OXA 48.
Okay. So, we can touch base offline on that one too.
Okay.
I was not aware of that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. If no other questions, we'd still have TB to go, and I wonder if Kristen is on with us.
I am on. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
So with TB, we're sitting at around 20 cases for the year. I'm trying to think what else. We continue to see Ukrainians enter the state. With our Ukrainian population, they are not being screened for TB overseas, which is very unique. It's due to the urgent humanitarian issues where they had to be evacuated quickly. So we encourage them to go to refugee health screening sites. However, sometimes this is not happening and patients are having to go to private providers. We are seeing numerous issues across the state, and CDC has allocated us some funding to support the screening of TB. So if you do have someone who needs TB screening services that is a newly arrived Ukrainian, please reach out to the program and we may be able to assist. And those would be my updates.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Kristen. All right. With the time that we have left, are there any other questions on outbreaks, infections, anything microbiology or non-microbiology?
Karen, this is Brian. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thanks, Brian.
Just, I wanted to piggyback on Kirsten's TB report. So with the laboratory, we are evaluating the one tube collection method for the quantiferon testing at the end of this month. So right now you have to collect 4 tubes, 1 mil in each tube, and we're evaluating the process that will allow us to collect 1 tube, and then that tube could be refrigerated and it's good for 48 hours or so. So it would help ease that collection or burden of that collection technique that currently exists. So look more for that in October.
Wow, that would be awesome. Are you thinking October will be when you'll switch over, or?
We're evaluating, microbiology actually is performing a validation next week. And then of course the results of the validation will need to be reviewed by Dr. Fay and staff, and upon that review then and his advice and consult, we'll move forward with it.
Okay, that's excellent. And there's no restrictions, time restrictions on this particular tube? Like
yes, there still are time restrictions. We don't have our whole announcement down, but initially what happens is you can collect the blood in 1 tube, and it's usually a heparinized tube, if I recall right. And it then needs to be refrigerated within 3 hours. And once refrigerated, it's good refrigerated for 48 hours.
Okay.
So what this means is that facilities that have limited phlebotomy experience or limited experience collecting the test in its 4-tube format can collect the single tube, and there's more flexibility than with that getting to our lab and more ease of collection for the nurse or the phlebotomist.
Exactly.
Hey, Brian, this is Pete. Can you incubate those tubes and then hold them longer before testing as well?
That I don't recall that as far as the single method. Now, the 4-tube method, you can incubate those for 16 hours and then they're good for 3 days.
Right.
So you still can incubate and have a longer turnaround time or a longer processing time with the 4-tube method. The problem is the collection of the 4 tubes could be challenging in certain circumstances, and overfills or not enough blood in the tube can occur. And once that happens, the samples have to be rejected. So we're looking for this as an improvement to the overall testing process, and thank microbiology for working with us on that.
All right, thanks, Brian.
Yes, thank you, Brian. That's good news on the TB interferon front. So, all right, any other questions? If not, I'm going to move on with the time we have left. Just a little bit on our exercise that MPHL will be holding in about a week and a half. Everything is coming together where we are going to do a mass specimen collection of both urine and blood. So totally different than all the outbreaks that we have had so far. But we know we're prepared if something happens in real life where we do have to collect those particular types of specimens. That certainly isn't a drive-through like it's been with the past outbreaks. But a couple of other areas I want to make sure and hit, and client services. If Tony Goldenstein, Brian, if Jess is on, anybody has any comments, problems that they'd like to share with the laboratories. Hearing none, is there any questions on NewLert? Our website does have instructions on how to use NewAlert. We are encouraging everyone, as Pete has said, to try to use, or Robin, I believe, to use the NewAlert system. It really is pretty user friendly. So if you're not familiar with it, I would be happy to walk you through it, and even step by step. Sometimes that's all it takes. All right, so go ahead. Questions?
Hey, Karen, this is Allison. I was just curious, like, what % of your orders are coming in via NewAlert versus like on paper?
I don't have those numbers. RPS or possibly Emily or Pete, but I don't know if we've actually sent down to count those.
Okay, no, just curious. I
Yeah.
assume the vast majority is coming through NewAlert now, since it's been up and running.
Right, exactly. So I have an interesting question also from Brandy. NewAlert has discontinued some of the logins for NewAlert have been discontinued, the logins. So it happens often, she explains, and I think the situation is there. Am I right, Brian, that if you don't use it for a while, it doesn't activate your account? So
some restrictions on that, and Paul might have a better idea, but about the timing, but you do have to use NewAlert or else it will deactivate you. Also, it does ask that you reset your password periodically. And so your password might not work in those circumstances. Typically there's always a forgot password link that can help with some of that. And my recommendation would be to call client services if you need help accessing NewAlert. Paul, I don't know, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I was going to say that I just sent the RPS interface support email address on there too. There's a great team of people who are very quick to respond to NewAlert related user issues. If you have, users that have been deactivated or need a password reset, that's not too difficult, and that group works really quickly. But the phone number, put that one in there too.
Yeah.
For client services, also very good. And then I did want to say for COVID, 99% of orders, we've required them to be entered digitally in NewAlert. Manual rec should be phased out, almost completely, apart from unique one-off circumstances where a digital order can't be placed. We should be using NewAlert for all orders. There should not be manual recs.
Right. So did I really hear you say, Paul, 99%?
For COVID, we just say, please
yeah.
log into NewAlert and re-enter the order. So,
yeah.
It's the way that we have to go. So.
Brandy does say that they don't use it very often. So what I would recommend, this is something I always did, if you're not going to use it right on that frequently, is I put myself a note in my calendar just every, 2 months, 3 months, possibly, or even every month, to go ahead and just log in. 5 minutes is all it takes, and that will essentially solve your problem. But it's something that I need a calendar reminder to do, otherwise it'll never get done. But that was my way of solving the problem. So I hope that helps for you, Brandy. All right. Other items I want to say, we've only got a couple more minutes, in that the safety tip of the month, I am looking at a training webinar that I thought was pretty cool. It is a 60-minute program that does have 3 modules to it. I don't think they're each 60 minutes. I think that you can complete all of them within that 60-minute time. But what I liked about it is this biosafety webinar does include quizzes, a survey, and an evaluation. So it can comply with compliance. And each laboratory should have competency testing on just your biosafety cabinet and the use of it. So I want you all to think about that. If this is something that would be useful, if you do not have a competence testing set up on biosafety, using biosafety cabinets, please consider this methodology. So hopefully I'll have more information out about that relatively soon. The other thing I wanted to mention is that for packaging and shipping, we are doing an exercise, and it is the LPX group that is currently working on their LPX. I've got 9 laboratories that not only will go through the 3 unknowns that they have, but they are required to not only call the public health laboratory to report what you have on your LPX. So that's a communications drill, but also we're throwing in the shipper's declaration exercise. So it's to practice what kind of shipper's declaration you have to submit. If you are in Lincoln, Omaha area, you have a very easy shipper's declaration to complete. Unfortunately, for our laboratories outside of that area, you do have to fill out, and it's just a practice. So it's not something that has to be done today, but I'm hoping by the end of the month that you do have that shipper's declaration completed and sent to me. You do not send the organism though. So beware, you do not need to send the organism. That is not a requirement of the LPX, but I do want a shipper's declaration example sent to MPHL. You can do it to mphl@unmc.edu or to my email kstiles@unmc.edu. So I will have more emails out about that. We are going to have a LPX review that will be held on October 4th. I know that I never got to one earlier this year to review the first set of LPX unknowns. And interestingly enough, there was one of those LPX-As that was extremely interesting, and none of the laboratories got it. I think that they had the right answer. I would have answered the way they did, but CDC did not call it that. And so we're going to talk about it on the October 4th. So I really hope that all my LPX laboratories can join us for that. All right. Well, before we go, I just want to give one last opportunity for anybody to ask questions. And meanwhile, while they're asking, please, if you haven't already, please sign in to the chat box. Our next meeting will be Monday, October 17th. And I am very open to topic ideas for that particular meeting. Does anybody else have a question before we go? All right. Thank you all for joining us today. Take care and see you next time. If you don't have any questions, or if you do, don't hesitate to call us. Bye-bye now.
Thanks, Karen.